The film is Misery, 1990, directed by Rob Reiner, screenplay by William Goldman, based on the Stephen King novel. In a way, I think some of us, me included, almost take it for granted that this is a horror film. But in your opinion, is this a horror film?
No, it's not a horror film. Horror films are. I mean, this is a matter of semantics and how people embrace genre. Horror films are, in a way, supernatural. Horror films are a killer that can't be killed. Jason, Leatherface, Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger. We're going to be talking about at some point, or that we did talk about. This is a thriller. This is reality set in a horror type situation, but that doesn't necessarily make it horror. Horror, I think part of the problem with horror films is that they don't adhere to any kind of natural logic. There's logic within the horror genre in what can happen, and there are tropes that the killer is not always dead. There's always room for the killer to come back. There are supernatural elements to it. A thriller is not that. A thriller is, I think the stakes are higher in a thriller. And there's also a sense of a better understanding of the antagonist. When you take a look at Stephen King's work, even so much as as far back as Carrie, those mean girls and the popular kids in school are better developed than you would see in a horror film, because you see that they're mean spirited, nasty girls. You see that they're in some cases sexually driven, or just merely cruel. In Misery, what you're seeing is psychosis, and it's obviously a hodgepodge of different types of insanity that Annie Wilkes is experiencing. But it's also very real and honest in its depiction of a certain level of loneliness. So I would not call this a horror film. It's not a horror for me. Now there are definitely people out there who would argue against it, and I readily welcome your argument, and it's fine. You're not going to change my mind on this one. There are thrills. There are moments where you jump, where you unexpectedly experience a fright. But this is not horror.
What are the arguments that you think people would make that say it is a horror film?
I guess some of the mood that is created, the angles, some of the very fact. I think that a lot of people would some people who are not versed as well in or who haven't given it as much thought would just see it as a protagonist victimized by an antagonist, and the violence that person is willing to bestow on their victim. So there's that aspect of it. There's the violence in the movie. There's the death. There's the blood. There's a lot of this. There are a number of scenes that are shot in the rain, lightning. All of that contributes to certain,
The mood.
yeah, the certain tropes and the mood of a horror film. But this is a more realistic. Horror is not realistic. I think that's the big difference. A thriller, there's nothing in this film that happens that I don't think could actually that couldn't actually happen in a real life story. I think this is a very, and I think that's what makes it a little bit more frightening. I think that's what makes it, with the Michael Myers, you have an element of evil incarnate and a supernatural kind of evil. Annie Wilkes is not that. Annie Wilkes is a lonely woman, probably abused, who has found something that she cares about, and then quickly loses her mind when it's taken from her. I think, especially in today's modern society, you got to remember this movie's 33 years old. I mean, that's a bug out to realize. Wow, this is a 33-year-old movie. That this movie's been sitting on the shelf for 33 years.
For me, it feels older because it feels. I mean, this is now. It's 1990, but it feels like an 80s movie to me.
Yeah, it's at the tail end of the '80s.
Yeah.
It definitely doesn't feel like a '90s movie. It doesn't feel like that.
No.
It feels more traditional in that sense of before movies became more strongly independent productions. Before you started having boutique production houses. Although this company, Castle Rock, was started by Rob Reiner and his producing partners after the success of Stand By Me and later The Princess Bride and a number of other films of that ilk. But this film,
You were saying modern society in today's modern society.
well, in today's modern society, you have a level of, especially now where people are so engrossed with with media. It, and they've always been, but I think you
Yeah, I mean,
find
it
people.
used to be radio. It's whatever.
Yeah. Well, if you go to any job, if you go to any place of work, you go into a break room. Three-quarters of the people there will not be having conversations. They'll be looking at something on their phone, and in some cases, they're not reading articles necessarily. Sometimes they're they find themselves in a
Scrolling.
trance of scrolling. Yeah, but scrolling what? Scrolling other people's lives, scrolling the Kardashians, scrolling the Bachelor, scrolling. I mean, people are so invested in celebrity life that it makes something like this even more powerful. So when you watch this, you realize, and both Stephen King's original novel and Rob Reiner's interpretation of that novel are very much influenced by their experiences, their success, their experiences with success in the entertainment industry. Stephen King's as a writer, and Rob Reiner's as an actor at one point into a director, but also the history and the chains that are involved in keeping those positions in a very strict kind of in a very strict sort of impression.
What do you?
Basically Stephen King was a horror writer. You never saw When I was growing up, Stephen King was a horror writer, dealing with the supernatural, dealing with, a crazy clown, a young girl with paranormal and paranormal powers. You also had a killer dog. You had a clown that had lived through various generations and was attacking children. You had the devil visiting a small town in Maine, and with Rob Reiner, you have the Hollywood son of Carl Reiner, one of the great comic producers, writers of the 50s through the 80s. Writer and performer on Sid Caesar's Show of Shows, Caesar's Hour, director of such films as The Jerk, Dead Man Don't Wear Plaid, Summer Rental, Summer School, and then you have his son, who is fighting to get out of his shadow, growing up in Hollywood with all of his, famous friend Albert Brooks, the son of a famous Borscht Belt, not a Borscht Belt comedian, but a Friars Club comic, brother to Bob Epstein, who would later become Super Dave Osborne. This is the period right before the Sheens. I mean, it's that whole Hollywood world of the family is in entertainment, moving into All in the Family, and then spending the next decade. I think it's only within the last couple of years that people have stopped calling him Meathead. He's Rob Reiner. He was Mike Stivic, and then the slow move into directing films, comedies, dramas, and then this film. And Rob Reiner's had one of the most successful directing careers in Hollywood.
What are some of his films?
The Princess Bride, The Sure Thing with John Cusack, Daphne Zuniga, A Few Good Men, of course, with Nicholson, Tom Cruise, Kevin
Spinal
Pollak,
Tap.
Spinal Tap.
That was like that's like his first movie, right?
Well, that was his movie where he was too dumb to know that he couldn't do it. That was an improvisational movie where it was almost true improvisation, where they're not
Cult film.
It's a cult film, yeah. They didn't know that they couldn't do
That
what
and
they were
Princess
doing.
Bride.
Yeah. Well, Princess Bride was studio, but it was studio. Princess Bride is a film that I don't remember ever coming out in a theater. I think we talked about this when we did our episode on The Princess Bride. I don't remember it ever coming out in a theater. It was a film that came, went, and was rediscovered on home video. And then it became a beloved classic because it tapped into something that was really both entertaining but also touching in the love story and the dedication of everybody involved, everybody in the story to their own personal purpose in the story. Inigo Montoya looking for the revenge of his father, Fezzik, the giant, Andre the Giant, and his care for his best friend and his Buttercup and Wesley. There's so much in that film that is just really beautifully realized. Again, a William Goldman screenplay from an original idea by Goldman, and Goldman is one of the premier. Probably the premier screenwriter in Hollywood after films such as Marathon Man. I believe he did Marathon Man and the other
All the
film,
President's Men.
All the President's Men. I forgot about that, but he did another film that
Butch
was
Cassidy.
Butch Cassidy. That's
Butch
right.
Cassidy. Yeah, and the
Yeah.
Sundance Kid.
So this is a man who has cachet in Hollywood. So a film like this. And first off, I've never read a Stephen King book. I've never read any of his books. I might have read Pet Sematary in middle school, but I don't recall it very well. I don't know if Stephen King is a good writer. I don't know if he's a bad writer. I don't know if he's overrated. And I can't speak to that. I won't say that but I do remember being in high school, and there was always some off kind of girl who was reading Stephen King. Not necessarily completely goth, but just kind of to herself and just kind of cute, but kind of strange, reading It or Cujo or some of the other really and he's a prolific writer. He's a very prolific writer.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
he's got to have 50 or 60 books at this point. It's kind of ridiculous, probably more.
And he's the kind of writer that can finish a draft in 3 months.
Yeah, I mean, he can knock
Um,
it out. It's funny because I remember we were talking about Invasion of the Body Snatchers and watching Jeff Goldblum lose his shit over how easy it was for the Leonard Nimoy character to write a book, and his saying, "I." What was the line that he said? I struggle with each word of each word has to be perfect, and you're just like,
yeah,
I get that to a degree, but I also look at that as somebody who's a little bit self-consumed, and you know
that's a matter of approach
that is a
and it's
matter
a
of
matter of
approach.
style
Yeah.
because now we're veering, but that's fine.
Hmm.
But the the idea, and I write,
Yeah.
so the idea is that there are different forms of writing, right? So for a poem, every word means something. For a novel, something long form, um, it's not every word. It's the overall the 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 product is greater than the sum of its parts, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's the rhythm, it's the mood, it's what you create. It's this.
yeah,
It's this.
it's
Yeah.
all of it. This big thing that you're creating. So when Jeff Goldblum's character says that, I am on that in that camp because I have those ideas about I don't think that it can be any kind of haphazard thing thrown together as long as you get this overall huge impression. Some people do feel that way. Stephen King is not going to, there are different types of novels and there are different types of novelists. And then there's also, again, going back to what you said, this is genre.
Hmm.
And a lot of times, genre in literature, it's going to get kind of marginalized. And the idea is, well, if you look at a romance novel, there's this, I think her name is Colleen Hoover.
Oh yeah.
She's selling a ton of fucking books right now. Um, do I think that fucking that is good writing? No. And I've looked through those books out of curiosity. Um, do I think it's good writing? No. That's plotting, if at best. Um, that's someone who knows their market. They know how to create the basic skeleton of a story because that's what they're going for, and it's like fast food, to be consumed, so that someone can get a dopamine hit and then move on. Stephen King obviously is not that,
But
but Stephen
that's
King knows how to. But that's what.
but that's exactly the central idea of this
That's
story.
the central idea of the character here.
No,
Yeah, is
no,
that
because this is the most autobiographical of all Stephen King books. Because Annie Wilkes is a stand-in for this, and I don't usually like this kind of thing in films, but it really works well here on in two ways because it works from the perspective of Stephen King and the writer, and it works in the perspective of Rob Reiner as the director, the interpreter
it
of
also
his writing.
works, but don't. But it also works third, and I agree with you. But it also works third for the main character,
Well,
who is not exactly Stephen King.
no, but then you can also throw in the Jimmy Caan aspect in there as well, and we're going to talk about that. But the Annie Wilkes character is is a manifestation of two things in Stephen King's life at this point in his career: his success and his pigeonholing into the horror genre after film, after such works as Pet Cemetery, Cujo, Carrie, The Shining, The Dead Zone. I mean, this guy has a remarkable catalog of modern horror.
Right.
But then you also take into account his addictions at the time, which I believe were primarily alcohol and maybe cocaine. So Stephen King was spiraling out of
It
control at
helps.
this point of his life. He
Um,
was
Stimulants help. Um,
to a degree until they
but,
stop helping. Everything helps
right.
until it stops
Um,
helping, you know? I mean,
well, yeah. What's that fine line
yeah.
between helping and hurting?
Yeah,
But
it's like
but
how good
before,
is it until it's not fun anymore, you know?
I like this idea of these different uh, layers of like meaning here. What I'm getting at, hold on. What I'm getting at is that, like, for example, like Stephen King, um, on the same level of Edgar Allan Poe, they're different, um, and it's a different thing. Is it like so-called high literature or is it genre? I mean, those are arbitrary distinctions. Um, the James Pattersons of the world are like writing factories. Um, yeah, they know how to write,
Yeah.
um, but they know how to plot. Um, that's not going to be the same thing as Marcel Proust. I'm sorry. Um, and is every word important for Marcel Proust? No, um, because he's going for something else. So it's a different thing. But George R. R. Martin is another genre, so-called fantasy writer, whatever. He
Hmm.
takes forever to write. Um, they've talked about this. You can see those videos where he's like, "How do you finish so quickly?" But Stephen King is disciplined, and he has a kind of like a, I don't know if it's like 1,000 or 3,000 words per day that he has to like reach or whatever. Um, so everyone is different. But getting back to this, it's like, interestingly, like you mentioned, okay, James Caan, I want to know about that. Rob Reiner, I want to know about that. Stephen King, okay, we can see direct parallels,
Yeah.
but there's also the character himself, who is Stephen King is dealing with being pigeonholed, um, in a genre. James Caan's character is being pigeonholed in a genre as well, but I think we don't get to see Stephen King's um, we don't get to see Stephen King struggle with questioning his own worth, his own value, the quality of his work, the way we see the character. And the fact that Stephen King is writing a character who's doing this, I think, is, on one hand, you can say it's a reflection of Stephen King feeling that, but at the same time, the fact that Stephen King is writing about it is also like, well, there's a way of distancing it and saying, well, look, I know what I'm worth. I need to go outside of I need to go outside of this genre. I think James Caan's character, on the other hand, is like, I want to go outside of this genre, but I don't know if I'm is all I'm good for is misery,
Yeah.
because that's one fucking series, um, that apparently, from the universe of this book, that we know this is it, and now he's going outside of that, um, and it takes this horrible event in his life to kind of get him to free him. But continue about these parallels. I want to hear Stephen King, Reiner, how they kind of
Well, Stephen King, I mean,
manifest their place in the world at that time manifests in this film.
well, at this time, in 1990, Stephen King is probably the number one writer in the country, if not the world, where he was. I mean,
You
his
mean in terms of sales?
in terms of sales is what I'm talking about, not in quality necessarily. Although all of that is he's not, but all of that is questionable based on the taste of the person who's reading the
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. I mean, this is,
Of course, but what is interesting about Stephen King is that he would he would he would rattle off these books, these stories. Some of them under his name, some of them under the name Richard Bachman. I don't know if he had another pseudonym after that, but it was a matter of putting out as much as he could at, you know. And I don't think he was like. I think the books are all based on the stories themselves. I haven't, like I said, I haven't read the books, but based on the stories themselves, they're all pretty different. I mean, Carrie, a young girl in middle school, a young girl in high school who's tormented by both her classmates and her mother, unable and unsure of how to deal with her supernatural powers. Cujo, Pet Cemetery. There's a level of the supernatural. There's a level of just terror, violence. There's a lot of different stories that come out of his work, but they're all based in fear. They're all based in this idea of the uncertainty of the self and the dangers of the world around affecting that. Misery is not horror in the sense of Carrie or Needful Things or what's the other one?
I mean, there's Pet Cemetery.
Pet Cemetery is definitely a horror film. Cujo I wouldn't call a horror film. I'd call it more of a thriller. But in that vein,
Dead Zone.
the Dead
Dark
Zone,
Half.
yeah, I haven't seen the Dark Half, but the Dead Zone is. So all of these, all of these powers, these kind of
Christine.
I forgot Christine. Yeah, say, if you think enough about it, you will find more and more shit coming out of the Running Man, the Dark Tower.
I mean,
films.
and he has the Dark Tower series, which is like this meta fucking like Salem's Lot, you know, which we talked about. I mean, this is like that. I mean, that's part of the thing is
well, the fact of the matter is the man is prolific. The man is fucking prolific, but he's very not, prolific. But he's not limited to the Paul Sheldon character is limited to one character, Misery Chastain, I think is her name, and he becomes dependent on her in the same way that.
Sorry, hold on.
Yeah.
This, for some reason, we might have gotten an interruption because there was some kind of emergency wireless fucking thing that went off right now.
I'm getting the same thing. I'll edit
it out. Okay. So we upset a fucking Stephen King fan saying it wasn't literary fiction. Okay.
Where were we?
So, going back to how prolific Stephen King is, and that he isn't limited to one character or one series the way that the Sheldon character is.
Yeah. Well, the Sheldon character is definitely somebody who is he's beholden to this character as Lauren Bacall, who's wonderful. It's great to see Lauren Bacall in this film. And
everybody's great in this film.
But this is basically a 2-person film with 3 backup people.
Yeah, it's like a stage play almost.
It really is like a stage play, and it was actually produced on stage with Bruce Willis taking the Paul Sheldon role and Laurie Metcalf taking the Annie Wilkes role, which I would have loved to have seen. I would have really been interested in what that would have been. But in this particular story, I mean, Lauren Bacall tells him, Misery Chastain paid for your daughter's braces. She put her through college. She's she bought you 2 house and floor seats to the Knicks. You can imagine that it would be difficult to end that relationship, to get away from that world, and but you also understand that at a certain point, how long can you continue writing something that you just don't give a shit about? And that's where the Paul Sheldon character is. It's like There were times when I was on stage where I was waiting to go on stage thinking, oh, I got to tell this fucking joke again. You know what I mean? I mean, that's the best that I can relate to it, where it's like, get off your ass and start doing something new and creative and um, be productive in your art. And the Sheldon character has found himself unable. I think there's two angles there, and it's not really dug into, but it's definitely there. Sheldon is afraid to go outside of his safe zone, but he also uses the excuse that nobody will allow him to go out of his safe zone. So in a weird way, he's handicapped by his own fears, but also by the limitations of the audience. Now, sure, if you've
Yeah.
been writing something for that long and that's all that you've been putting out, people are going to have a hard time accepting anything new because people are very set in their ways, and they want to take something that's comfortable. And I think this is this is everything falling into place beautifully for a story. I don't know how realistic it would be in real life that a major fan would have the opportunity to hold up their idol in this way.
What do you mean? Like, what do you mean, like an opportunity to hold up their idol this way? You mean like to
To be able to
like
sequester
kidnap
them,
them?
to capture them. What this is a strange
I mean,
series of
why not?
circumstances. Well,
Especially then, pre-internet, you know? Like, um,
well, the thing about it is like
fuck,
being
this is
able to.
only a couple years after uh, Mark David Chapman fucking murders John Lennon. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like, hey,
But
you
the
know, Catcher in
idea,
the Rye in his pocket,
but
Double Fantasy signed,
yeah,
boom.
but this is also this is an extreme example. That's a that's an obvious and limited, I would say, version of real life. Can you imagine somebody saving? Can you imagine saving? Okay, look, I'm gonna go into my own fucking psychosis. 23
Okay,
year old me,
yeah,
23-year-old me running into Robert De Niro in the desert of Phoenix, passed out on a hiking trip because he's like every other asshole who comes out here and doesn't prepare for the heat in the summer hiking. I save his life.
hmm
I bring him home. I keep him. I keep him in my basement, forcing him to act out scenes from Raging Bull and Taxi Driver,
yeah,
and then to
yeah,
develop those characters. That's what this is. That's
yeah,
what's brilliant about Annie Wilkes, this creation, and Kathy Bates's fucking brilliant performance. I think Kathy Bates is incredible in this film, and it's
yeah.
you had never seen her before this, and it's weird because I'll go back into old movies and she'll turn up in character roles here and there. You see her in Ulu Grossbard's Straight Time with Dustin Hoffman as Gary Busey's wife, and it's like she's virtually unrecognizable. But to throw herself so completely into this character, because it's at times very sad. She's a very sad character, and you have a great deal of empathy for her. And even as she is becoming quite annoying and very you can see Paul Sheldon looking at her like, Jesus Christ, what am I dealing with? This lady is just goofy.
Yeah,
Until you realize this bitch is fucking nuts. She's crazy as cat shit.
right. And
And
that's the scary.
and
That's the
that's
horror
and
part. That's
that's
the
the thing. That's the
and that
yeah.
well, and we're all over the place as usual.
Yeah,
But
but
the horror thriller aspect, it's like, yeah, horror. Um, and this is kind of what I've been getting at this month when we're talking about this
hold on a
thing.
minute. Hold on a minute.
Yeah, sure.
The sound is. Can you go again?
Yeah, the
No, wait a
horror
minute.
thriller.
That's okay. Go ahead.
We good?
Yeah, we're good
The
now.
whole the
Hmm.
horror thriller kind of distinction is what I've been getting at this month.
Hold on, I'm gonna have to call you back.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Hello?
Okay, there we go. Let's go. So the
All right.
horror thriller distinction
So
you were
the
getting at.
horror thriller distinction is kind of what I've been touching on and getting at this whole month.
Yeah.
And now we've gotten into more definitive kind of ways of looking at this. But what I talked about however many weeks ago is like the feeling that horror is not always the scariest.
Yeah.
For me, horror creates this vibe of like a certain kind of coziness, a certain kind of nostalgia. When you're bundled kind of and like you want to be in this mood to watch something, that's supposedly it's scary. But it's scary, sometimes a little funny, fun. Um, as you described it, more as you described it, more supernatural, death,
Mm-hmm.
monsters, grotesque, whatever. Thriller is more suspenseful, what's going to happen, more shock. This film, I watched it with Leslie. I had already seen it. She hadn't seen it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like I hadn't seen it in a long time, but I felt like I had anxiety um, the whole time. And I know this movie. And I when we were getting ready for um, Nightmare on Elm Street, I was going through the experience that I've been feeling this more and more, and it's showing in the episodes, and I'm just like, what the fuck is this? You feel like you've seen a movie, and then you're watching it, and you're like, well, I've seen this part, but I don't remember any of this other shit. Um, or or the opposite, I'm like, I don't think I've seen Nightmare on Elm Street Part Two, but then you're like, no, I've seen this
Yeah.
when you watch it again, and this kind of like, what have I seen? What haven't I seen? And how is that different than what I think? Um, and so this film I've seen, and I know I've seen, and I know it's pretty simple. The premise is uh, a novelist has just completed his latest book in Colorado, and he's on his way back to New York. He gets caught in a snowstorm, and he's rescued by this obsessed fan who knows he goes there. She knows he goes to she knows that he goes to her neck of the woods, and so she knows his movements, so she's there to grab him and rescue him and trap him. um, Leslie's not seen this film, um, and compared to An American Werewolf in London, this was fucking scarier to her because it was just like, what the fuck? Because of I mean, it's a Goldman script.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Stephen King story. It's Rob Reiner's direction. It's Kathy Bates's brilliant acting. It's James Caan's brilliant acting. All his subtext. The subtext, for those of you who may not know, is it's the undertone. What's not being said? What's between the lines? What's the subtext? What's under the words? A lot of times it's the opposite of what's being said. You can say "I love you" many different ways, and mean many different things. Now, you're on edge watching this, as we said, essentially a stage play. In order to stay in that area, you have to have a lot of variety in terms of performance. And you look at Kathy Bates, and you don't know every time you don't know when the door's going to open and she's going to come into the room because his legs are broken.
Yeah.
He's in bed. He's already dealing with all this shit. He's dealing with, I'm feeling trapped in this genre. And now he's literally trapped in the genre because she represents not only the reader who on some level he may have grown to disrespect, because I mean, think about it. He may feel that these uninformed, ignorant fans of his, it's like he may feel this is shit. All I've done in my life is shit, and the fact that I got success with it, and that's what they eat up. I've sold out, and these are the idiots that bought it. And I'm glad they bought it because I've benefited financially, etc., from it. But my soul, whatever, has not, and now I want to go out and I want to do literature. But they're not going to be interested in that. They want she wants misery.
Yeah.
So not only does she represent feelings that he may or may not have towards his audience, but she represents that actual box, that little room, the bed, all of it. His legs are fucking broken. And literally when he tries to climb out of it, she fucking hobbles him.
That's a fucking great scene. That is an incredible scene, and that's a scene that I think that's the scene that William Goldman made Goldman want to write the film, and it upset him that because in the book she doesn't do that. She cuts his foot off. She cuts his left foot off, and then she cauterizes it with a blowtorch.
Mm-hmm.
But Rob Reiner rightfully said that would be far too much for an audience to handle, and you would remove any empathy that you had for the Kathy Bates character, because what Kathy Bates does that is truly remarkable is that she, through all of her heinous, all of what she puts Paul Sheldon through, you still have the sense of empathy towards her and sadness and a feeling of wanting her to find some kind of happiness or safety or some kind of feelings of purpose. And when she is, if you were to have her cut off his foot and permanently disable him, it would be gone. But the way she does it, and this is going to sound very weird, this is going to sound very strange, but I think it's what Kathy Bates was going for in the performance. She hobbles him with such a loving, there's such a love in her action, because in her head she's saving him. And that's one of the really interesting things about it, and I had forgotten about that part of the film, is that she believes that she's saving him. She believes that she is doing something good because she, in her warped mind, which is, the hobbling scene in this film is we had a little bit of problem with the tech right now, so we might be going over something that we've already done. I'm going to edit as best I can, but the hobbling scene in this film is the one that I think overall, as crazy as this film is, as intense and as moody and as compelling as so much of this movie is, that's the scene that people go back to. That's the scene that strikes the greatest degree of tension, and it's the moment where people really go back to in this film. So as I was watching it yesterday or 2 days ago, whenever I watched this film, that's the one that I actually cringed. I actually turned to the side. I didn't turn the movie off, but I had to turn away. And she hobbles both feet. And as you watch that, you're just thinking to yourself, my God, I don't think I've ever seen anything like that in a movie. It was disturbing. It was fucking disturbing.
Earlier, you said you touched on the aspect that it wasn't from a performance perspective.
Hmm.
It doesn't feel like Kathy Bates is motivated to harm him in that sense, and that from the character perspective, that what she thinks she's doing is actually saving him. Go into that again.
Well, I think they talk about it in on the Blu-ray of this, the Scream Factory Blu-ray. They have a number of clinical psychologists talking about the Kathy Bates character, the Annie Wilkes character, and the psychosis involved, the paranoia, the sadness, but also that delusional that delusional world of believing that God has spoken to you. And I forgot that she talks so heavily about God speaking to her about making this right, and and her purpose in his life. And I think instead of just trying to hurt him physically and psychologically, because obviously all of what she's doing to him is it's wild shit. It's crazy. It's evil in a lot of ways. But she honestly believes that she is doing God's work, and she is trying to help somebody live up to their full potential. And I think that's something in this film that allows you to both. It keeps her from becoming villainous, I guess. She's empathetic. She's a sad woman. She's she's a sad person that you feel empathy towards. That you have this feeling of there is a loneliness in this woman. There is a sense of there's a need for acceptance and purpose. And as she describes it, her life has been difficult. Her life has been. She alludes to it. She doesn't come out straight and say what her husband was. She and Rob Reiner, Kathy Bates and Rob Reiner, had worked out a backstory for the character involving physical and sexual abuse. So a lot of that is there, and that is what we call, subtext. And Kathy Bates is putting it out there without throwing it in your face. So she's ultimately a sympathetic character, but one that has to be stopped, has to be ultimately stopped. And with Paul Sheldon, with James Caan building his strength, and I think that's one of the brilliant things about casting James Caan, because at this time I don't think James Caan. They had gone to William Hurt twice. They had gone to De Niro. They had gone to Pacino. They'd gone through a lot of different actors trying to, Kevin Kline, a lot of different actors looking to fill this role. And Jimmy Caan didn't remind anybody of a writer. He didn't remind anybody of somebody who could do this. But after watching this movie, I dare you to find somebody who could have done the part better. And I think part of that is Jimmy Caan being as physical an actor as he is, moving around, always an antsy type of actor. And to have him tied down in this bed the way he is for what feels like months, I think that really contributes to his performance. So when he's getting better, like that moment where she brings him a 50-pound typewriter and he starts doing shoulder raises with it, I was like, oh shit, this motherfucker is getting ready to. This guy's fighting for his life. And the tagline for this movie is Paul Sheldon made his living as a writer. Now he's writing to live, or
Yeah.
something like that. You know, it was something
Yeah.
like that.
There is an element of like, well, and this is another perspective of it too, is
Yeah.
like, um, going back to the kind of like writer as worker.
Yeah.
Um, this, the kind of prolific writer who, um, especially like in an American sense, is like, well, I'm going to the shed to write, and I'm going to write for 8 hours or whatever the fuck it is, or
Yeah.
8 hours or 3,000 words or 1,000 or 5,000, whatever, and I'm going to knock it out. And that person who kind of goes back, that's their factory, versus someone who is like, reclined, writing like, smoking cigarettes or whatever, and just like writing in this kind of leisurely kind of vibe, but approaching it more as a, maybe in a not leisurely fashion, but more in a more relaxed kind of inspired atmosphere, where they're going to show up every day, but they're showing up every day in that kind of lifestyle, versus I'm going to go with my typewriter to the window or to the wall. That sounds weird, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
They're going to write till the sweat runs down, like
Yeah.
their balls, like that, like it's the worker bee. And James Caan is that, when he's in that environment where he has to literally write a new book, because you described earlier on, I don't know if it got cut because of the technical issues, but you said in Stephen King's novel, she cuts his foot off.
Yeah.
And then she cauterizes it with a torch.
Yeah.
And then you talked about her hobbling him was an aspect of her saving him and her guiding him towards his masterpiece. Because in the film, what's happened is he's gone to his Colorado retreat, wherever he goes and writes. He works on this book. He has one cigarette, and he has a bottle of champagne. And then he drives back to New York with the manuscript. So she's read his new manuscript, which is not it's not in the Misery series. It's a new book. And according to her, it's filth, and it's full of profanity. So what she does is she makes him burn his book, his manuscript. She makes him burn his fucking manuscript. She makes him burn his fucking manuscript. And like, as I was talking before God said shut the fuck up, I'm a writer, and most of my shit no one has ever seen, because although my writing life has been fairly long in my short life, I've had stuff published in like literary magazines and journals. I've had chapbooks, years ago. We did theater. We met doing theater, and probably most of my writing that's been out there has been seen on a small stage by handfuls of audiences. Other than that, I wrote, consulted, worked with, co-wrote as a freelance copy editor. And some of the people one of my main people I worked with, some of his stuff made it to small print, small scale. But um, when you work with words, any media, any form of like media, but any work of art, anything that you create, you know, they say kill your babies is one of the things, right? Like if
Yeah.
it's too precious, it's got to go. I mean, whatever. That's another discussion, whatever. But the point is like, okay, the idea is for you to kill your babies, and maybe your editor can help you kill your babies, um, but not fucking Kathy Bates. And Kathy Bates is like, no, kill this baby because your next one is the one. Because she makes him burn the manuscript, and then his new book, the one that was previously published, is now out. She gets the first copy, and it's the last Misery book where Misery dies. And she's like, no, you're going to fucking write another book where Misery comes back. So she literally is, she doesn't cut his foot off to cripple him. She hobbles him to basically save him, according to her, and to also save Misery.
Yeah.
She doesn't burn the manuscript. You know, she's not cutting his hands off. She wants him to write. She wants him to come back, but she wants Misery to come back, and she's going to be the catalyst in that. And so that it's an interesting point that you bring up, that you know she was the character is a nurse before, or you know, before the film begins, in the character's past, and you see clippings that she's kept, and she kills all these babies. So that's another thing, is like literally kill your babies. She's in a way kind of like the mother of Misery, you know what I mean? Because she's saving her, and she has all of this deep knowledge of the character and of the character's history because she's a fanatic. So she's like, of course, Misery had to come back this way because blah 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 was really her grandfather, and and her grandmother also died of this blah blah. And so she's able to tie in all of these things. And James Caan must, under duress, fucking write this novel.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, this isn't gonna like really like I can't write like this. Even the workhorse writer can't work like this. But she's like, no, you will, and so he does. And so it's interesting to see him kind of throw himself in this work, and then you wonder, what the fuck is the quality of it? But she's like all into it, and then ultimately he's able to use that script and that whole the conceit of burning the book. He threatens her now with the book, and that's how he's able to. And he uses the typewriter that he's been training with literally as something that's going to save his life.
Yeah.
He's lived off of his typewriter, but now he will kill with his typewriter and save himself. So you have Rob Reiner. You were talking about Rob Reiner, pigeonholed as the meathead, and then struggling to get out.
Well, pigeonholed as the meathead, but also as the son of one of the great comedy
Right.
Carl Reiner, the great Carl Reiner, Mel Brooks. Well, that relationship, Brooks and Reiner. He was always going to be living in his father's shadow. He was always going to be living as the meathead. It's incredible success, and it's kind of crazy because he talks a little bit about, Lauren Bacall throwing more money and more prestige and more success in his face about continuing Misery. Rob Reiner, at the end of All in the Family, they were talking to him. Let's have a spin-off between you and Gloria, the Sally Struthers character. And Rob Reiner said, if I do this, I'll never be able to get out from underneath it. and I want
Yeah.
to direct. I want to do this, and he's acted sporadically in films, most notably in Scorsese's The Wolf of Wall Street as DiCaprio's father. And I think he's great in that. The couple of scenes that he has are just fucking wonderful. But he really took a chance on himself. He is this character. He put it out there, and at this point in his career, he had Stand By Me, which was a huge critical success and a pretty good box office success. The Princess Bride, that would go on to become a standard and a classic. But he didn't have A Few Good Men. He didn't have When Harry Met Sally. I don't think he had done When Harry Met Sally at this point. I think When Harry Met
I think
Sally
he
was
might
the
have.
one. Maybe. I don't know
I think so.
if he did it. It might not have been. Yeah. Okay. So When Harry Met Sally was the year before, was released the year before. So I think you can make the argument that it didn't have the box office success at the time going into this movie that would have given him the
Or the
confidence. You know
cultural
what I
kind
mean?
of
Yeah.
significance. There's the rom-com fucking classic that it
That
seems to have become.
Yeah. So there's that. But so it was. You always have to look at these films in respect to the times in which they're made, and how much of a power that is over their acceptance, their the public's embracing of the story. And I think this was a film that people were really surprised by. Jimmy Caan hadn't done anything in a long time. Kathy Bates was
Yeah.
nobody. Kathy Bates was a Broadway actor. You know, Richard Farnsworth was a guy that showed up in films here and there, usually playing
It was amazing.
and he is fucking great in this film. So that when his scene comes up, I remember being incredibly sad at that moment,
Yeah.
regardless of what
Yeah.
happened to me. And
Yeah.
I've told this story on the podcast before, haven't I? About the woman in the
I
theater.
don't know.
I've told you
Oh,
though.
tell it again. Tell that story again. You
Okay.
have told it. Tell it again.
I don't know if I've told it on the podcast. I've told it to you, but
You have told it on the podcast.
Okay, so-
But yeah.
we go to see this movie, myself and a buddy of mine, and we're not sure what we're going to get, but it's a Friday night, it's opening night. I thought it was opening night, I don't remember, but we're sitting there, I'm sitting in my favorite seat, I'm in the middle, and I'm watching this, and you grow to love this Richard Farnsworth character, and he goes to the house to investigate. He's looking through the house, and he finally discovers there's somebody, Sheldon is in there, and he goes to the not the stairwell, but underneath the
Well, the basement
Are
is.
you moving groceries right now?
No, it's the fucking garbage collector outside.
Yeah. I have a dog that won't stop. That I'm amazed has shut up the entire time that we're here. But he opens that door and he's like, "Mr. Sheldon." Well, he can hear it. He's calling out to him, and Caan goes, "I'm down here. I'm down here." It's the basement, the root cellar, whatever. And he opens the door, and you're thinking to yourself, "Oh shit, he's going to save his life, and now he's going to have to fight Kathy Bates, or I don't know what's going to happen." And Farnsworth stands there, and his chest explodes, and he falls, and you see Kathy Bates behind him with a shotgun. The second that she fired the shotgun, this woman who I'd never met, never seen, did not make eye contact with her before we sat down, she reaches over and grabs my and my friend's heads, and we literally leaped out of our seats. I'm not saying we jumped, we screamed. And then we just started laughing our asses off because this lady got us. I don't know if she was seeing it a second time and we were seeing
She had to have known that it was at that moment.
She might have read the book. I don't know what the fuck was going on. And I don't know why this woman would do what she did, but it's probably my favorite movie. It's probably my favorite moment in any movie that I've experienced as a movie watcher. And you try doing that shit right now, that lady would get killed.
Yeah.
But she gave me one of the great memories of my life. I'm 15 years old and I'm watching this movie and I'm engrossed in it. And I guess we had been laughing in the right places. We had been spooked in the right places. And she did this. And it scared the shit out of us. It freaked us the fuck out. And then we got our composure again and we just started laughing our asses off. And at the end, we didn't say anything to her. She didn't say anything to us. The movie was over. We were sitting there. When we turned around, she was gone. And it was crazy.
It's
It was
Kathy
fucking
Bates.
nuts. Yeah, maybe it was Kathy Bates. I don't know, but it's part of that is the degree of love that you have for Richard Farnsworth in this character, in this performance, because you had seen him in other things before, and he comes off just like a sweet old man, but he's
But
also
also a
very.
fucking Sherlock Holmes.
He does, doesn't he? He's like a Sherlock Holmes. He's his attention to detail, his ability to start digging and pulling at the strings and figuring out. And none of it seems contrived. None of it seems like, oh, that's just fucking that's coincidence. He would hit upon something like that. No. He's paying attention, he's reading the books, he's finding something that jumps out at him, and it becomes that for his little part it's a real detective story. And then you have that sweet relationship with him and his wife, Frances Sternhagen, who
Yeah.
again, she's wonderful. I mean,
Yeah.
but this is the film. Kathy Bates, Caan, Lauren Bacall in her bookend and showing up, I think at one more moment in
Yeah,
the film.
literally.
Yeah, exactly. And then those two. And you're overwhelmed. And I think this is probably the best Stephen King adaptation that there is. Which, if you were to say the good ones, you would say this one, Shawshank, The Green Mile, probably. Even though I can't watch that movie without thinking of Paul Mooney and his ridiculousness on it, and most of it is what he says is absolutely true. But Stand by Me.
Next year,
Yeah.
we should do just an episode on just touching on I mean, eventually we should do film, not every single film, obviously, but because we've only talked about a handful of Stephen King adaptations. I think we've only talked about
Carrie and
Salem's
Needful
Lot,
Things.
Carrie, Needful Things.
No, we brought up Salem's Lot. We didn't really talk about it because I still haven't seen it.
Oh, so then we brought it up in the context of
The vampire.
in one of the vampire
Mhm.
series, yeah.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about it. We
Oh.
briefly touched on it. But we've never really gotten deep into it. We've talked Needful Things, Carrie, and that's it, I think.
Now this.
And now this, yeah.
But yeah, to just one episode to go through Oh, we did the Walken one also.
Oh, The Dead Zone. Yes. Yes.
The Dead Zone.
Yes.
To go through where, film by film, whether we've seen them or not, to just talk about maybe what we've heard about it, the cast, its place, because a lot of these are 80s.
Yeah.
And it's just the kind of Stephen King adaptations were just a thing. What's the newest one coming out? What's happening? And yeah, this is the Halloweeny vibe. But thriller, horror, it's scary.
I think this is scarier than most. I think it's because you know that there is crazy out there, and you know that there is fanaticism. And this was not too long after. Do you remember a show on CBS called My Sister Sam?
My Sister Sam, no, I don't think
Okay.
so.
It was a CBS sitcom, and Pam Dauber from Mork and Mindy was on it. And there was a young woman who played her sister named Rebecca Schaefer. Now, she lived in
Oh yeah,
West Hollywood. Yeah. And some man came to her home. I don't know if she knew him. I don't know if she didn't. I don't know. No, he was a guy that was infatuated with her. He wasn't an ex-boyfriend. He was just a guy who was infatuated with her. And he found where she lived. He went to her home. He knocked on the door, and when she opened, he killed her. I don't know if he stabbed her or if he shot her, but that was 1989. That was right before this
yeah,
movie. And there was I think, if I recall, there was some speculation of whether this film coming out so soon after that was in bad taste, or um, the level of fanaticism and people really because really people really do believe that they have a relationship with these stars, that they've that you know
well,
that
yeah.
the character comes off. Yeah.
That's why I brought up John Lennon's
Yeah.
murder, and or look at the what's the name of that woman who was in that show, The Commish, the wife. She was attacked.
Oh yeah. Sir Teresa Saldana. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. She was attacked. That would have been way before the Commish.
hmm
Um, but uh, but yeah, someone stabbed her.
Yeah. But
This is
so this what so it's really interesting that Stephen King plays with this trope where it's the obsessed
oh, she's Raging
fan.
Bull.
What's that?
I just remembered that she's the wife in Raging Bull too.
Yeah, she is. She's the Joe Pesci's wife. Um, there's this idea that with Stephen King, he's writing about his success. The Annie Wilkes character is a stand-in for the chains of his success, but also his cocaine and alcohol addiction at the time, or just right before that. In addition to real life fanaticism that exists, this movie, and that's I don't often like metaphor sometimes because it's handled badly. Like it's too.
I love metaphor.
I like it when it's done well, but when it's too heavy-handed, you're just like, oh Jesus Christ, this is what you're gonna. This stands in for this. No, but Annie Wilkes is a manifestation of all of that loss of control, of of a sickness that takes over while you are at your weakest, and with King being addicted to drugs and alcohol, and in a sense addicted to his fame and success, it plays out. It's a very cautionary tale if you dig further and further into the story that is being projected onto that screen. In addition to Rob Reiner's input, James Caan's input, and I guess you could say Kathy Bates in her
From
desire for
performance, yeah.
performance. Yeah, for
And William Goldman's words, his
exactly.
adaptation.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I mean, like we said, she stands not only for loss of control, but she stands for loss of control in a very controlled setting. And I don't just mean physically, but I mean in terms of like the routine, the expectations, the how you're being defined, how you've come to define yourself. The industry views you a certain way. Um, I mean, anytime you're dealing with any kind of audience, at a certain point, that's going to affect, on some level, either you accept it or you reject it or you modify it or whatever. Um, you're going to have to come to terms with, now you're in this relationship. it seems mostly one-sided, but it's not, because your audience is consuming whatever you're putting out, and whether that means they're buying or they're contributing every month to your buymeacoffee.com/WatchRickRamos account or whatever to support, or thank you, Mr. Burroughs, once again this month, or whatever it means. Like, at a certain point, you're asking, how is this going to be received? And if you're not asking that, most of the time you're choosing to not ask that. And the choice to not ask it is also an acknowledgement of it. Because you get an idea of kind of like, at a certain point, well, whoever they are, have liked this, or they haven't liked that or that. So it's either going to be, well, I mean, ultimately you're doing it for you, but at the same time, you know that, like, they have to fucking see it, or they have to hear it, or they have to read it, or they have to, however the audience consumes your shit. And after a while, you get this expectation. The Miles Davises of the world are ahead of the curve, and they're like, and then the audience base learns that, well, this is what it is now, but we know it's going to change. We know that David Bowie was going to change. When Miles went electric, fucking people freaked out. When Bob Dylan went electric, people freaked out.
Yeah.
And the danger of it too is that if you try to cater too much to whatever you think are the needs, either it becomes this totally superficial pop, like bubblegum garbage, or else it fails because it loses a sense of authenticity, a sense of soul. And then to have someone, like, even in a harder place, is like something like any kind of genre work, which is like, definitely has tropes, it definitely has a language, it has a style to it. And if you try to deviate from that, the people who are really invested in genre are going to now define it in a different way. And it's like, well, I read horror, and this is not horror. This is fucking science fiction, fantasy, whatever, Western.
Yeah.
So I'm not reading that. You used to be a horror writer. What happened to you? I'm gonna now go to this person because, and then if you decide after now you're gonna do another horror book, it's like, well, now, okay, see, now you're coming back to your home. You should have never deviated to begin with. Blah blah blah. So it's a difficult position to be put in, because it's kind of like, it's that double-edged sword. The thing that's feeding you is also the thing that's killing you or trapping you.
And that's what this film captures beautifully.
Yeah. And you had said that James Caan was kind of like in that scenario, because you talked about Stephen King, you talked about Rob Reiner, we've talked about the character. How does James Caan's career tie into this?
Well, I think Caan was among those great actors to come out of the 1970s: De Niro, Pacino, Hoffman, Gene Hackman, and yet he didn't, with the exception of a handful of films, he never really headlined films and became a box office draw in the way that they did, or at least a sustainable one. The only film that I can think of his where he is the lead, and it's still considered a great film that people talk about, is Michael Mann's Thief. Everything else,
which you just did recently, right?
I don't know if I talked about it. I started to do it. I don't think I recorded the episode, because I think I watched it and then I realized I wanted to talk to you about it, so I didn't record it. Yeah. So he he falls into this world where he was not. I guess he didn't live up to the. He didn't ascend in the same way that Pacino and De Niro would, and a lot of his roles became. I think he got pigeonholed into a tough guy type of situation, which plays really well in this film because he is a tough guy. James Caan seems like somebody who was a bit formidable that you wouldn't want to get into it with, but because of a car crash with broken legs and a busted up shoulder, it adds to the tension of the film because you can tell he does not. James Woods, the man, does not want to be in that bed.
You mean James Caan?
James, did I call him Woods? I'm sorry, Caan. Yes.
Yeah,
James Woods is a whole different.
James Woods would have someone in the bed.
Yeah, that's true.
That's a different movie.
It's a way different movie.
And I don't know James Woods. I don't fuck James Woods. Anyway,
I like James Woods, regardless of his fucked up politics. I like James Woods.
Look, me too. But
yeah,
whatever. You know, like he's a different animal.
He's a different beast. But I think that's one of the things with Caan where it really comes out in the performance in a way that I don't think William Hurt could have delivered. I think William Hurt could have played the writer much the same way that he did in Smoke, or I think Kevin Kline could have played. But the antsiness, the desire to fight back in this way, to when he and Kathy Bates go at it, she's formidable because of who she her passion, her passion for the to save misery, to be upset when she calls him a lying cocksucker. You believe that moment. It's a fucking great delivery. You lying cocksucker, just fucking brilliant.
Before it's been like you dirty birdie and all this, and she's like this small town kitschy creature with all her knickknacks and all that, and she's just like this slice of Americana, and then the underbelly shows itself.
Yeah,
and she goes from goodness to Betsy or whatever kind of sayings that she throws off. You lying cocksucker, and she fucking grabs him by the throat, and she will not die.
Yeah. And that's the moment where it does slip into horror, where she keeps coming back, and I love that, and to see it in a theater with people excited, and to see Jimmy Caan finally get over on her, get her, and that's a great moment. It's a movie that builds towards that. And it delivers in such a beautiful way. It really does. I think it's a damn good movie. I think it's a great way to end the month. I think it's, regardless of whether somebody wants to call it horror or not, it scares the shit. It scares you. So it does that. But I think it does it in a thriller. Yeah. But it's real. It's real horror. Yeah. If you want to call it true and honest horror that can exist in this world, then I'll give you that. But this is not Jason. This is not Michael Myers. Those are horrors, and you could argue those are slasher films. Okay, now you're getting into the minutia of it, and we can sit all day and we can argue that, and I'd love to argue that, if I weren't doing anything. But this is ultimately more frightening because it exists. It's in this world, and the Mark David Chapmans, the Rebecca Schaeffer's, all of these people who have encountered celebrity fandom, they live with that. I remember meeting Kurt Russell, and I ran and had to stop myself all of a sudden and just approach him very quietly, and because here's this fucking giant Mexican coming at him. He doesn't know who the fuck I am. I checked an old lady on a goddamn
It's the thing.
yeah. I mean, I'm like, I'm gonna meet R.J. McCready. I'm gonna meet Jack Burton. This is fucking exciting to me. This is crazy. And then I'm thinking, slow down, motherfucker. He don't know you.
Yeah,
Get it
yeah.
together. Pull
And
it
he doesn't
together.
care.
And yeah, he's about to fucking drop kick me. I don't know what the hell's gonna happen. So, you have to be aware of that kind of thing because fandom, delusional fandom exists in this world,
Yeah,
and these people have to
yeah.
protect
I mean,
themselves from it.
look at how many people have been in fucking what's his name's house. Why can I always? Whenever I need to remember people's names, I can't. The Matrix.
The Matrix.
John Wick.
Oh
John
yeah,
Wick.
Keanu
Right?
Reeves. Yeah,
Keanu Reeves.
Keanu Reeves.
Uh, there's been at least one instance where it's like he finds some lady, some chick in his house,
Yeah.
and he's being Keanu Reeves. He's like supposedly he's been very calm about it and very kind of like
Yeah.
he probably looks confused like in his roles where he's just kind of like, huh?
Yeah.
And I mean, at other times, someone attacked George Harrison.
Yeah. I remember that story. Yeah.
Um, you know what I mean? So it's like,
And that
what
shit is
the
life
fuck?
or death, especially when they know they're there and you don't know they're there. That's life and death. Now you're fucking, you got something to be worried about. And that's what's great about this is that it doesn't, I don't think it paints her, in an unrealistic light. There are people out there that are lonely. There is a level, this is an offshoot of the Travis Bickle thing.
Yeah,
There's a loneliness in this
yeah.
world that,
Travis Bickle going into King of Comedy,
yes, yeah,
going into Joker.
mm-hmm. All of that. There is a loneliness and a sadness in this world that some people are drowning in. You need to figure out a way to make that to get through it. And films like this are warnings. And that's I just think it's a all around. Kathy Bates won a well-deserved Oscar for this film.
Or think about this is one that I don't hear people mention a lot. Going back to De Niro, what about that film, The Fan?
Oh yeah, not a good film, but on point for
This theme.
for this thing definitely. So I mean, it's out there. It's the movies. The movies are in some ways exaggerated and dramatized.
Dramatized. Yep.
But that drama exists, and to pretend that it doesn't is to the detriment of those who are going to be the victims of it. And that's I think there's a lot. I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned from this film. It's a really well made. It's it harkens back to a great deal of Hitchcock, and we talked a little bit about the vocabulary of film and the Hitchcock aspect of it, how so much of that becomes the standard in which to tell a story like this. Their Dutch angles, the rain, the lighting, the use of the camera to make Jimmy Caan even less powerful, to shoot him the way they do, where from above, where he's
Smaller.
He's smaller. He's so much smaller than what he appears to be, and Jimmy Caan is not Jimmy Caan made a career out of being a tough guy. To see him in this film and being manhandled this way, it's really surprising, and this is one aspect of a good film, when it's frustrating for the viewer because you want him to be able to get up. You want him to be able to move around. That's good filmmaking. The tension is there. Rob Reiner knocks it out of the park with this one, and everybody comes together doing great work. So I'm glad that we could end the month on a really, really great horror film, thriller, whatever you want to call it. So if you're interested in helping us out, please go to buymeacoffee.com/watchRickRamos and give whatever you can, because goddamn it, the holidays are coming up, and we gotta, well, we're just like you. We gotta buy for the family, keeping the lights on, buying for the family, and making it a little bit easier. That's our episode. We'll be back next
Hostages
month.
to feed.
Yeah, we're looking forward to a fun November and December, and a whole new year that's promising great things. Thanks for listening. You have a good one. Bye bye now.